Hi, I'm Simon. Thanks for coming to watch me. This is my second time talking here at AMA, my third time attending. I love this conference. And I pitched this talk. I pitched two talks for the CFP. One of them, and I was speaking to Suzanne Kaiser, who unfortunately can't be here. I said, right, I've got one which is way in the middle of my comfort zone. I can do easily. And I've got one which I'd really like to do, but it's super left field and it's a little bit weird. Guess which one they picked? Okay, so 4 lenses on organizations. There's a lot of slides here. Jackie said slides are free, which is good because I have about 106 slides to get through in about 35 minutes. So let's hope that I get through them quickly. If you want to follow along, the slide deck is here. Scan this. It's on speaker deck. I'm going to go quickly, so if you miss any slides, but you want to have a look at them, I'll just leave this up for a couple more seconds. Cool. Thanks. A prologue before I get into the 4 lenses, very similar to what Simon talked about this morning about maps of Paris. All maps, the map is not the territory, and George Box's quote from in the 50s, originally about maths, all models are wrong in some way, but some of them are useful. You've got to have a feedback loop. Said Woody, here is my favorite feedback loop I've seen lately. Cool. Let's get into the models. So lens number 1 is on team, topologies, and value stream management. And again, this is my third time here. Plenty of people have talked in detail. I'm not going to recap much about this. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how team topologies and value stream management intersect. But then I'm going to push at the edges of them a little and see where the sort of boundaries are, and that sort of say that they're not a model of everything. They are a model, and they are useful. So Suzanne, and Suzanne's book is, I think, finally coming out in October or November this year. Suzanne's presented at the last 2 conferences, and one of the awesome things Suzanne has done is bring together Wardley mapping, domain-driven design, and team topologies, and I love her illustrations of the 4 team types and the 3 types of collaboration in team topologies, in particular pointing out that the stream-aligned team is the team we should really be focusing on, because they're the ones who are delivering value to the customers. And the point of platform enabling and complicated subsystem teams is to support them by increasing their autonomy and reducing their cognitive load. And value streams, we've talked a lot about socio-technical systems. This conference, last conference, I majored on that last conference. But ultimately, what Liz Keogh said way back in 2013 is very much true, that value streams are made of people. And Liz illustrates this. Her article is fabulous. I'd recommend to read. She says, look, good user stories talk about things like, as Mark from security, I need to know X. And then that will sort of really personalize the members of the value stream there. And in terms of what's going on in the value stream, interesting LinkedIn post sort of question saying, when did it become received wisdom that we need a tech org and a product org? Manuel, one of the co-authors of Team Topologies, says, well, a bit triggered here. I've got a strong reaction to this. There's a lot of effort to get product orgs and tech orgs to agree. Maybe the benefits are dubious, but he says, on the other hand, as an industry, we don't have enough examples of proper organizing around value streams. Jonathan Smart and others are working on it. So I guess I'm one of those others. I was a co-author on John's book, Sooner, Safer, Happier, and this material is a sort of early work-through of the chapter I'm going to contribute to John's next book, which is tentatively titled Organising for Outcomes. And so we're going to look a lot more at that. Hopefully many people will have seen this viral diagram from John Cutler on different ways and sort of a maturity model around collaboration within a value stream. So is your team sort of handing stuff over at every point in the value stream at the top? Or is the team boundary doing all the things from opportunity selection all the way through build, test, release, and run. So this, I think, for me, it's that sort of combination of, well, a classic tech DevOps loop at the bottom left there. But this is expanding this. This is doing that thing of merging product and tech and saying, well, everything from sort of opportunity selection all the way through is what a sort of prod ops, biz dev prod ops team could and should be doing. SAFe, for me, the Scaled Agile framework, which I guess some of us are not necessarily big fans of, has this, what I think is weird split between operational value streams and development value streams, because I think that is that sort of, we build it, you run it. And I don't think that's where we should be. I think we do want this sort of, you run it, you build it approach here. But John's come back to this diagram recently, and he says, look, it took me an hour to do this diagram, and it has gone viral, but there is stuff missing. There's stuff left to the left of opportunity selection, to the right of run. This is linear, but actually it's not necessarily linear. It doesn't touch platform and enabling teams or dependencies. So I think there's more to do there as well. On value stream mapping, awesome book from Steve and Andrew. Doing this in a very sort of complexity-friendly way, inspect and adapt, some really good mapping techniques here that are iterating through a future state towards potentially an ideal state of a value stream. And again, I think this stuff is awesome, and I think there's a really interesting point made by Chris Matz. Everybody I quote here is wise, but Chris is sort of extra levels of wise for those who know him. He says, look, we take this sort of value stream from lean, from the production of physical goods, where it's optimized to produce the same physical thing many times, but software does not do that. The value stream of software should produce one thing once, and then move on to the next feature, and then the next one, and then the next one. And Chris has this diagram for value streams where he's saying, look, there are teams at the top, and they're collaborating. Well, this quarter, these are the priorities of the organization. And those teams are collaborating differently. The colored lines, they're too pastel, Jackie, I'm sorry, but this is Chris's diagram. The colored lines are the value streams for this quarter. Next quarter, they will be different, is Chris's point. So I think a lot of teams are organizing into what's called value streams. Value stream seems to be the name of the moment for a team of teams. But Chris's point is, well, no, not necessarily. So I think what we're experimenting with for the next book is saying, well, actually, these are value centers. That teams of teams, and so on up, they are valuable. They're not just cost centers, they are producing value. But the value streams, they may differ ultimately, quarter by quarter, maybe more frequently. So, like I said, that's lens number one. I don't want to sort of delve deeply into that. Suzanne's book comes out soon. It's awesome. Probably most of you already have the Team Topologies book. It's such a bestseller. And Steve and Andrew's book is so good on flow engineering. Back to models. Martin Fowler, I can never do a presentation without a Martin Fowler quote. He says, again, it's the George Box thing, Team Topologies is wrong. Complex organizations can't simply be broken down into just 4 kinds of teams and 3 kinds of interactions, but constraints like these are what makes a model useful. Okay, so again, back to Suzanne's, finishing this lens on Suzanne's stuff. What's going on here? Great, we're combining DDD, we're combining Wardley mapping and team topologies, but there's a sort of implication here that there is a God's eye view sitting on top of this. that's actually making these decisions. And unless you're sort of holocracy, one of these nirvana, self-managing, top-to-bottom organizations, there's probably a layer above this that is starting to do, I think, what we call management. So that's lens number 2, nested and network value and modular organizations. Back in Sooner, Safer, Happier, we have a little model for this. And because all of us authors met working in a bank, we're boring, and we use a bank as the model for this to illustrate it. And these were called, like I said, these were called value streams in the book, but we've renamed them for now value centers. So start in the middle. Sorry for those who eyes gloss over at financial services terminology, but you've got sort of teams, the circles. You've got 3 teams working in the listed derivatives value center, team of teams, maybe even agile release train if that's your cup of tea, and 1 working in cash equities. But that's nested. That lives in the equities value center. Zoom out again, and that lives in global markets. Zoom out again, that lives in the investment bank. Zoom out again, and that lives in a bank. And that bank might have a retail banking arm, a corporate banking arm, a wealth management arm. And that's the organization. And there are things, management tasks going on at all levels of that organization. Of course, this is not in the least bit opposed to team topologies. John and Matthew present frequently on how BVSSH hearts team topologies. So we're talking here about nested value, modularity, and hierarchy. Steve Jobs, well, not a fan of hierarchy, not a fan of being run by hierarchy. I think if you look a bit more deeply into this quote. So let's delve into that a little bit. This is from my last presentation a couple of years ago on different levels of architecture and sort of modern enterprise architecture. So this talks about the triangle of value, teams, and systems or architecture, tech architecture. And this says, look, an ideal 2-pizza stream-aligned team looks like this. Again, back to Jackie's thing about color, you've got a few little colored folks there sitting on the bottom left. What does that mean? Well, what we talk about and what we advise in Sooner, Safer, Happier is having leads for the 3 corners of a triangle. Value outcome leads, that's something like a product owner. A team outcome lead is something a little bit like a Scrum Master. Architecture outcome lead, some people don't like this because Scrum doesn't have it, but Scrum is not the gospel. This is sort of like an extreme programming coach for those who are XP fans like me. It's also there in Scott Ambler and Mark Lyons' disciplined agile. But effectively, we've got 3 leads. At some point, we call them coaches. They're at least, they're not sort of telling people what to do here, but they're supporting the team in these 3 corners of the triangle. But then, again from last time, zoom out. No value sits alone. No team is delivering pure end customer value in the majority of organizations. So you've got a team of teams there. And we have the same trio sitting across that team of teams. This is from Eduardo. There's Eduardo here somewhere. Hey, Eduardo. So, of course, architecting has to happen across teams, not just within. Again, it's that coherence. You're not an entirely decoupled system or team or set of value. There is some coupling, however loose it is, there is some degree of coupling, which means there's got to be some degree of, well, actually not just architecture, but managing and organizing and deciding what the value is. So again, from last time, up at a business line, you've got a bunch of value that has some coherence. You've got a set of teams that have some coherence and a system of systems. So again, that's the model we have there in Sooner, Safer, Happier. And, well, like I said, the new book is sort of a double click on the chapter where we talk about this. So we've been pondering, well, what actually goes on? What do these folks actually do at that level? Charles Lambdin, a superb article on why Agile is losing steam. Charles is great. It's a very iconoclastic article, and several about Agile. But what he says, which I think most of us probably agree with, is impactful product design decisions are typically made well above the level of individual product teams. And really lovely piece of writing from way back in 1996. It's not just that organizations design products, and this is a sort of weirdly non-technical reverse Conway that says products design organizations as well. It's definitely true in something like the bank that we've been looking at. And a lot of people do not like hierarchy. They think delayering in organizations is a good thing. I support charity here. A beautiful article from last year that says, look, advice, my boss says we don't need any engineering managers. In charity's inimitable style, this is a rant, and it's a brilliant rant that says, look, no, hierarchy is critical to the adaptability, resilience, and scalability of complex systems. Dan Davis, who we'll talk about a bit more later as well, says, look, middle management, people laugh at middle management. They sit around drinking bad coffee in rooms with whiteboards, unironically doing all the things that people like to laugh at middle managers for. But all of these activities are vital for maintaining long-term organizational coherence. Dan talks about the much maligned middle manager, and I'm sorry for this metaphor in advance. He says, taking the middle management out of an organization is like taking the cerebrum from a cat. There were experiments done for this that say, well, actually the cat goes around eating, drinking, living its life fine until you change something in its environment. The point at which you change something in an environment, the cat's cerebrum is gone, the cat is confused and can do nothing. Middle management are the cerebrum of the organization, is Dan Davis's theory, that organizations can do their thing, but the organizational memory, the coherence is there in the middle layers. This, I think, is related to, and again, Jackie quoted Gregor earlier. I love Gregor. I will quote him till the cows come home. On Gregor's metaphor for the role of the architect, or the architecture function in a digital enterprise, riding up and down that hierarchy and communicating and translating between those different layers. John Kay, my favorite economist, says, look, again, he was the one who quoted Steve Jobs. He says, look, power hierarchies are not how real organizations work, but mediating and ratifying hierarchies are the reality of most successful businesses. Elisa Guerrero, who plenty of people love to quote, extremely dense writer. I was speaking to my friend Shinyao. You can only read sort of sections of Alicia's work at a time, but it's so rich. She talks about actually this slightly different approach in a book, chapter 12 of this book, about reclaiming hierarchy, about this concept of holons and holarchy. And that, I think, is a really interesting one too. But she also talks about Herb Simon's parable of the two watchmakers, which effectively says, look, Tempus and Rohrer, both watchmakers, both making effectively similarly fine and really popular watches. But Tempus gets interrupted. His watch falls apart because he has just 1,000 pieces that he assembles into a watch, whereas Rohrer makes things into modules, and then modules and modules. If he gets interrupted, it's fine, he can just restart where he was, and he is the one making money. So Sooner, Safer, Happier talks about leaders at all levels, not a leader-follower model, not a power hierarchy, but leaders at all levels, delegation, intent-based leadership, the sort of stuff that comes out of Turn the Ship Around for those who've read that. So for me, I think this concept of a sort of good hierarchy versus a bad hierarchy. Good hierarchy has theory Y, for those who know that, versus theory X. Good hierarchy is modular, mediating, ratifying versus the power hierarchy. Good hierarchy has a sort of leader-leader model versus leader-follower. And it has leaders at all levels rather than leadership versus the workers. So back here to the bank. Again, there are leaders. There are leaders within the teams. They should be seen as leaders. And again, not even directing leaders, but leaders for the team members. But leaders, there's this great Scots English word, there's not in English, called outwith. Leaders outwith the teams and across them. And this concept of staff and line, staff engineers are popular these days, and that comes from the sort of staff and line distinction, where line is way down at the bottom and staff is across. But of course, staff and line is fractal as well. If you're sitting in equities, managing equities, then listed derivatives and cash equities are line. If you're sitting in listed derivatives, managing the various teams, then, well, your staff and their line. So this goes on all the way up. So like I said, we were wondering what these sort of managers, the people higher up the organization, are doing. And then we came across this concept called the viable systems model, which a guy called Stafford Beer invented in the 60s and wrote about through most of his later life, through the 60s, through the 90s. It's part of management cybernetics. And Stafford Beer says there's three elements of an organization. Again, hopefully these colors aren't too offensive. Cyan, doing the work, yellow, the environment, and green, the green triangle, the green diamond, managing the work. And Beer said, look at these things separately and interacting. He then used another cyberneticist, W. Ross Ashby's law of requisite variety, which says only variety can absorb variety. What does that mean? Well, the environment has a huge amount of variety. Delivering value to customers in that environment means you need to sort of understand the variety of that environment, but you can't understand all of it. So you've got to do some of that. And then managing the people who are doing the work to deliver the value to the customers, well, you're able to absorb even less variety. So you've got to do something called variety engineering. And sorry, this gets weird here. I did promise this was a little weird. Because this was the 1960s when this was invented, and electronics was sort of popular in diagramming form then. So there is the triangle, which is an amplifier, and the squiggly line, which is a resistor. It says you need to attenuate. If you're doing the work, you need a model of the environment, but that can't be all the model of the environment. It's the map of Paris again. Same if you're managing. If you're managing the work, you need a model of the people doing the work. You also need a model of the environment because you're interacting with that as well. Strange and weird loop. But also, there is unfolding, something recursive. So, great. Environment, doing the work, managing the work. But within the doing the work, there's also managing the work. And doing some lower level bits of work, unfolding again. And above that, well, it's the same thing. You're embedded with an environment that's doing work. It's back to that staff and line fractal. And it's back to exactly this. So you have teams which sit in a department, which sit in a department above that, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And this is called the viable systems model. What does viable mean? Well, viable for Stafford Beer meant that it can sustain, it can go on. And that's the point of the organization. The point of the organization is to go on, to be viable, to continue serving its purpose. And what he said was viability is a combination of two things. Internal stability, but adaptability to external change. And that those are sort of working in contradiction to each other, and so there need to be trade-offs between them. So he says there are three things that you need to do to manage internal stability. You need to coordinate the lower level, the unfolded teams. You need to make sure they're coherent. Ideally, you're doing some monitoring. This is sort of the Gemba walk, management by walking around. It's actually really engaging with the teams that you're managing. And then he says, well, look, the adaptability is looking to the future. It's what's called there and then. It's seeing who do we not serve? What are we not doing yet? What's going on out there that changes what we should be doing? Like I said, those are trade-offs. So there's a final top-level system which balances those things. It's the purpose of the organization, and that system knows what to do and sets a coherent scope and identity for, again, this level of the organization. These are not different teams. These are not different departments. These are just sets of activities. This is why I've got system in quotes here. Beer says, even if this is a single person organization, you still need to be doing all of these things. And all of these systems at all levels, you see that sort of recursion going down, are all interconnected. Of course, they have to be. They have to be talking to each other through information and making decisions. What are those systems? Beer, in his writing, does not give canonical names to the 5 systems, which is a little weird. Again, Patrick Hoverstadt, who's written an awesome book on the viable systems model, calls them just these 5 things: policy, intelligence, cohesion, monitoring, coordination, implementation. Different set entirely from John Walker and Angela Espinosa. This is my sort of gathering of what I've read, what I've seen, what I understand about them. It's lots of different words. I really like what Mike Burrows does. Mike Burrows' book is just out on applying the viable systems model to just at team level. But Mike makes these into sort of active words: self-governing, strategizing, organizing, contextualizing, coordinating, and then the most important, the value-creating work. This also, for me, aligns to Simon Wardley's work earlier. I think System 5, the thing at the top, is the why of purpose on the strategy loop, and System 4, looking outside, that's the why of movement. I think there's a lot of alignment here. But a danger here. There is a danger, like I said, that this can be seen as sort of managers versus doers. This is not the intention of this model at all. So again, just to reiterate, we've got that model, and it can be applied to our bank model. It can be applied at sort of ground level. So a self-managing team is doing these management activities. It's looking at cohesion, coordination, strategy. The team should be looking themselves out, not just assuming someone else is going to do it for them, and they're participating in the value-creating work activities, maybe in that sort of biz dev product loop of delivering value and operating it. And then zoom out. That working and leading out with and across. So then that sort of small management team, they are participating in management activities. What about the teams at the lowest level, the level 0 teams? Are they participating in management activities? This, I think, is a really interesting question, one I had a good chat with Eduardo about before. I think there's a bit of a paradox here. It is good to get participation from those teams in that sort of, in particular in the integration between teams, but is that too much cognitive load for the teams? Should we be pushing that sort of management as a service, pushing the management activities down to a platform or an enabling team? I think that's, like I said, this is work in progress. This is a question. But this is about, like Sooner, Safer, Happier says, leaders at all levels rather than leader-follower model. And it's about the balance of coherence and autonomy. Autonomy at the team level and the team of teams level, but the thing that the higher levels of the organization are bringing together is coherence. Why are we here as an organization? Why are we here as a department? What does that mean to us? What's our purpose? And how does that integrate? Again, this comes from cybernetics. This, for me, has a really interesting etymology as a sort of sidebar here. It comes from the Greek Kubernetes, which means helmsman, but it's the same etymology as governance through the Latin governator. So a few books to recommend on this if you are interested in reading more about the viable systems model. Dan Davis's book, The Unaccountability Machine, is superb from last year. Patrick Hoverstadt's from a few years ago. And Mike Burrows, like I said, only just out. And fabulous book. I got to read the pre-release of that. And if you're super interested and you want to spend a lot of money, then you can still pick up reprints of Stafford Beer's originals. Dave Snowden, inventor of Cynefin, which several people have talked about already, he is a little skeptical about the contemporary application of VSM. Again, this is the sort of Wrong, but useful. In particular, in this article, Dave talks about insufficient attention to generating informal networks. I think that it's actually quite important. So lens 4, finally, I have about 7 minutes on this, that's good. The liquid organization, so those sort of informal networks, this I think is interesting organizational hierarchy picture. Many people will have seen this one before. I do love this fun. This is the real organizational hierarchy. And this one is fun, but honestly, even in this organizational hierarchy, the hierarchy is not the only set of interactions that matter. So somebody might be setting policy that affects people way outside of their line. Somebody might be mentoring somebody might be leading a community of practice. There are many, many interrelationships that make the organization run. There is a sort of fake version of Conway's law that says you ship your organizational chart. You don't ship your organizational chart at all. Conway, of course, talks something much richer. He says effectively you ship the communication structures of your organization. The communication structures of your organization are not your org chart. They're definitely not. So the title of this lens, The Liquid Organization, came from a conversation with Alistair Coburn in a car park outside my headquarters at Saxo Bank. He was running a conference, and he said, running a course. And he just, as an aside, said, look, there's two types of organization, and they have different ways of working with agile methods. There's a sort of frozen ice type organization where this is hard. They're too rigid, and they're not open to sort of novelty and uncertainty, whereas a more sort of water melted organization can definitely do that. This set my mind running and set sort of within the Sooner, Safer, Happier Slack, several minds running. We had a big long thread discussing this. So look, of course, water is in more than two states. It can be frozen, it can be liquid, it can be gas. Let's not get into plasma and other weird states of matter. But this metaphor is, I think, super interesting. So rigid structures, traditional banks, where we have worked and we've managed to get some melting going on, they are extremely rigid. But also on the other side, there are chaotic startups. And there's a lot of sort of gaseous behavior there. And what we're saying is, well, this in-between ground is what we want. Again, back to Dave, back to Cynefin. There is a 3-domain version of Cynefin. It's slightly less known than the 4-domain version. But Dave has talked about how those 3 domains are a little like solid, liquid, and gas, with liquid being the sort of complex domain where a lot of organizational work sits. Ralph Stacey, another writer on complexity theory, says this is very interesting. The world that organizations face is a paradox, and I guess people should recognize this. It's intertwined order and disorder. So there are very much some things in organizations which are ordered. You need to follow regulations. You need to pay people at the end of the month. Great. No complexity in that. It's probably even clear, never mind complicated. But there's a lot of complexity there as well. They are intertwined. But managers, Ralph Stacey says, and again, you should recognize this, almost always approach the task from the perspective of order and largely ignore the role of disorder. I guess this chimes with what Woody was saying earlier on people asking for estimates. Estimates work in the ordered world, but they don't at all in the disordered world. Jinyao, who I have recently become friends with, who is awesome, also talks about complexity and paradoxes. There is a paradox that what's complex is in flux and constantly changing, but also has a stable identity. Really recommend this presentation from last year. There's a change model, an old change model from 1947 that says, great, if organizations are going to change, they need to unfreeze and then go into a liquid form and then refreeze. HBR article saying, actually, no, that's no longer the case. You can't have it as a one-time project. You need ongoing transformation. And so instead, you should be looking to unfreeze and then be comfortable with constant change. Back to coherence and autonomy, those trade-offs we talked about with the viable systems model. Well, here I think the analogy is that solid is too much focusing on coherence, that gaseous organizations are focusing too much on autonomy, and that the liquid organization is the perfect balance between the two. And so here we look to thaw solid organizations, or just to organize gaseous ones. Tony Kank, who's also helping co-write John's latest book, has used, this is the only AI mention in this talk, has used ChatGPT to generate some really, really nice stories. And if you got the presentation, you can read some of these of sort of change-resistant organization, a transformation of an organization from frozen to liquid, and the vapor core chaos, the story of an unstructured organization. And again, these sort of really, really ring true. And of course, the phase changes can go the other way. They can potentially run the other way, that you can freeze liquid, you can evaporate liquid to gas. Weirdly, there are also sort of less common phase changes from solid to gas or gas to solid. The interesting one for me, I think, is when startups become scale-ups and they recruit people who think they know how to run project management organizations. And we have seen this. The startups to scale up go, okay, right, now we need a PMO, now we need to go into waterfall mode. That is a danger too. Jean Berendt, my friend who wrote the chapter 8 of Sooner, Safer, Happier on the learning organization, he's a real physics nerd. He talks about this in terms of entropy and says there's this optimal entropy zone that solids have low entropy, gases have high entropy, and this sort of optimal amount of entropy and energy is in the liquid organization with a learning culture, with high alignment and autonomy, with enabling constraints, self-organizing, continuous innovation and high performance. Back to Simon. I don't know if Simon's still here, but a fabulous quote from Simon that says, too many execs try to fill with broken organizations by filling with the structure. Start by fixing principles and let the structure emerge. Stop trying to fix broken principles by using a reorganization. I've never seen that work. This, again, should be very familiar to people. Back to Lewin's change model. Great. We've had a bunch of execs go into a room and create a target operating model. That's what we're going to do, and in 6 months, everything will be perfect because we've met the target operating model. Again, that is never going to work. Simon's principles, again, the doctrine that is universally useful. Way up there in the top right, design your organization for constant evolution. So finally, what I think are a bunch of sort of properties of the liquid organization: understanding complexity, taking an uncertainty mindset, putting governing and enabling constraints in place, the good bureaucracy we talked about, the good hierarchy working in theory Y, designing for constant evolution, balancing management within and out with across, because otherwise you're going to end up with not enough coherence or too much. That's it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That was quite a lot. And obviously a little bit overwhelming for the audience. We only have one question, and that seems to come from the other room. So, we still have 3 minutes for questions. We should make use of that. Any questions? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for amazing presentation. It was a joy to sit through it, so thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question because you mentioned a few books around hierarchy. So there is another one by Geoffrey West, Scale. Do you know this one?
I know of it, but I have not read that.
I would be very curious about your take on it.
Let me take your LinkedIn, and I will give it a read, and I will get back to you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I guess...
Oh, one behind you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
But it didn't work for some reason. So I was wondering, do we need to think about a company or an org as a product and need to apply like product methods to orgs and companies? So experimenting more. And,
exactly this. And I think this is what I want to, this is what I will end up writing more about. And I think we will all end up writing more about exactly that. So there was when we did Sooner, Safer, Happier, one of John's quotes in the sort of presentations he did was, want to do an agile transformation, don't. Focus on outcomes. And for me, the sort of similar quote for here is, want to do an organizational transformation, don't. Focus on outcomes, exactly that, product mindset.
Great, I think that's a great ending quote for this talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.